My name's Robbie, and I'm a product manager on the Google Docs team. And while normally based in New York, I'm really excited to be here today to talk a little bit about Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides. However, before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to learn a little bit about the people in the room. Who here uses Google Docs, Google Sheets, or Google Slides as part of their work? This is amazing. Who here uses another productivity suite as well? Well, it's good to have you too. In this presentation, for those already using Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides, we're going to talk about some of the new and upcoming functionality that will help make you even more productive at work. And for those who have not yet made the transition, we're going to walk through a couple different workflows to show how the cloud-first nature of Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides will help transform the way you work. But first, I'd like to start with a story, loosely based on real events. And this is a story of Chuck and Dana. And Chuck and Dana work at the originally named Acme Corporation, a company that has not yet switched to Google Docs. And like they do every quarter, how's that? Better? Awesome. So we have Chuck and Dana working at Acme Corporation. And like they do every quarter, Chuck and Dana are working on the quarterly projections for the company. And because they don't yet use Google Docs, the process goes like this. First, Chuck takes his initial thoughts and puts them into a document, takes that document, attaches it to an email, and sends it to Dana. Dana, being a great team player, takes that document and forwards it to her teammates. Each of her teammates work on a parallel copy of the file to avoid issues like file locking or overwriting each other's changes. So when they're complete, they each forward their suggestions to Dana. Dana consolidates them, adds her own tweaks, and sends it back to Chuck. Chuck then completes the similar process with his team, forwarding the email to his colleagues, asking for their review. Unfortunately, this time, when one of Chuck's colleagues is sending back his response, he includes Chuck's personal email address. Luckily, Chuck is on his A game, notices this, forwards it to his work account, and is able to consolidate into a final document, which he sends to Dana for final review. This is where things really start to go off the rails. Chuck's team, unaware that this document had been sent to Dana, continued to make tweaks and adjustments to the document. Meanwhile, Dana's team makes one final pass, making a couple of different additions on their own. It's only 12 hours later that Chuck and Dana realize that their teams are working on completely distinct files. This kicks off a flurry of emails back and forth, where Chuck and Dana are forced to go line by line through the resulting document, identifying what changes to accept and what changes to reject, before finally ending on the ultimate Chuck _v3 _final. Now, some of you who don't yet use Google Docs, this might be painfully familiar. And there's some things that are definitely worrying about this situation. There's a lot of wasted effort. There's some insecure file handling and a very weak audit trail. But before we get to that, let's talk about what went right. Chuck and Dana were able to collaborate on a file and come up with a resulting collaborative document. Unfortunately, a lot of things went wrong. Chuck and Dana spent an inordinate amount of time merging and consolidating different files. And even when they settled on a finalized copy, they're unable to clean up the dozens of previous drafts spread across multiple email threads. This inefficiency and this wasted time is what we call overhead. Overhead not only impacts Chuck and Dana, Overhead impacts has a ripple effect across their entire team, impacting everyone at Acme Corporation who's waiting for this file. And the lost time isn't negligible. A survey of key decision makers and senior executives found that inefficient processes were the #1 cause of wasted time during the workday. This is why at Google we are so focused on increasing this efficiency, removing this overhead, and allowing workers to focus on what's important. So how do we do this? The most important thing to understand about G Suite and about Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides is that they are cloud native. Instead of the legacy system, which is based on files, Google Docs are stored in the cloud and referenced via links. This architecture makes a couple exciting things possible. First, it makes real-time collaboration super easy. Multiple collaborators can work together, they can make changes simultaneously, and we can be confident that they're always working on the same document. It makes security much easier because instead of having to worry about the security of hundreds of versions spread across multiple email boxes, you have a single source of truth stored in the cloud. And finally, the cloud allows us to collect data about your employees' use and deploy and train machine learning models to help eliminate some of the mundane tasks and make those employees' work more efficient. So how would this help out Chuck and Dana? Well, instead of instead of sending documents back and forth, they would share a single link across their entire team. Their entire team can work in parallel, always referencing the correct version. And Chuck and Dana would not need to spend the hours reconciling documents, tracking and managing version history. It'll all be done for them by Google Docs in the cloud. And as a result, Chuck and Dana can focus on what's truly important, coming up with the best quarterly projections they possibly can. Now, while this example just talked about Google Docs, all the Google editors, Google Docs for documents, Google Sheets for spreadsheets, and Google Slides for presentations are all cloud native. And so while I'll be pointing out I'll point to each of these products in this presentation, in generally, the advantages of being a cloud native editor apply to all three. So we know how this impacts Chuck and Dana. However, the core question is, how does it impact you? The question for this entire presentation is, why Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides? And what we are going to show is that by adopting the cloud-native architecture of Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides, you can make your organization more collaborative, more secure, more productive, and more flexible. So let's start with collaboration. How does Google Docs help make your organization more collaborative? Let's take a minute to think about how a traditional file-based productivity suite would work. You create a file, you email that file back and forth. In Google Docs, being cloud-centric, instead of sharing files, you share links. What this means is that you can be sure that everyone is accessing and collaborating in the same document, unlocking things like real-time collaboration, the ability for multiple editors to make edits in the same time. And because Google Docs doesn't have file or even paragraph locking, it is just as easy to work together as work independently. And if Chuck and Dana had applied this, they could have saved a ton of time. They wouldn't have had all that overhead, and they would have been able to work in one document and focus on the thing that really mattered, where they were adding value. And the time savings that we're talking about aren't negligible. McKinsey found that moving from email to a collaborative platform like Google Docs would free up 8% of the work week for more productive activities. That's an additional month every year freed up from managing files to doing something more productive, adding value, being innovative. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as simply being able to contribute to a document. It's important to know what type of contributions are needed and when. Interaction workers waste nearly 20% of the work week tracking down colleagues who can help with a specific task. That's why Google Docs has a model for actionable collaboration. When you're collaborating within a Google Doc, you can apply comments, you can apply suggestions, you can apply action items. And associated with each of those, you can add a common thread. So you and your team can get on the same page about what needs to be done. And then using action items and @ mentions, you can assign that task to a particular individual to make sure it does get done. And when this is assigned, the assignee receives a notification telling them what they need to do. Google Docs offers notifications for edits, for comments, for action items. So in many cases, you know what you need to do and what's being asked of you before you even open the document. But if you just open the document without seeing those notifications, that's okay too. From the Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides homepages, you can see which documents have open action items looking at their badges. Once you've identified that, you can quickly go into the document and make the necessary adjustments. Another advantage of being in the cloud is that when you make those adjustments, everything is auditable. Unlike files, when they get shared back and forth, and things like version history can be turned on and off, all changes within a Google Doc are stored within that document's version history. This is essentially a time machine for the entire document, seeing all the changes from inception, and making you feel comfortable sharing your document. Because you can always know that if someone is collaborating your document, someone makes a change, you can look back and understand who made the change, understand exactly when they made the change, and revert it if necessary. In addition to showing change level detail, Google Docs also surfaces metadata about how users are collaborating in your document. From Activity Dashboard, you can see both who you've shared a document with, who has actually viewed the document and when, and also see viewer trends over time. This is important and something that Chuck and Dana would have found very useful, because if they would have seen that half the team wasn't in the document, they would have realized something was wrong and could have actioned it very quickly. So I've told you a bunch of features, a bunch of advantages of this cloud-based collaboration. But what is the impact? To measure this, Google contracted Forrester Research to help quantify what is the impact of the real-time collaboration offered by Google Docs. Forrester talked to 7 companies that had recently transitioned from a legacy productivity suite to Google Docs and worked to understand what was different, what changed about the team's collaboration, quality of output, speed of execution. And Forrester found that the real-time collaboration of Google Docs saved the collaborative workers 2 hours per week, equal to 13 full weekdays per year. And this time is money. Forrester actually did a conversion and found that this additional time was equivalent to an $8 million savings for each of these organizations over 3 years. So it's clear that Google Docs can make you more collaborative, and that collaboration matters. It makes you more productive. But that's not the only advantage of being a cloud native editor. Google Docs, because it is cloud native, you're not sending and receiving files. When you send a file to a collaborator, the information in the file is stored in the file. And so once it's been sent, it can be hard to retrieve. And this causes a lot of risk for your organization. Now, it's a bit hard to quantify what is the impact of, or what is the effect of data breaches, because most data breaches aren't typically reported. One sector that is an exception is within healthcare. HIPAA regulations require that all data breaches that contain patient information to be reported shortly after the actual breach. So we can look at this data set and understand what type of data breaches occur, what are the risks, and how Google Docs can help address those. And the first finding that appears when you look at this is that most data breaches, 68%, occur when a device is lost or stolen. Specifically, they occur when a device is lost or stolen that has sensitive files stored on it. You'll see that files will be a recurring theme. And to drive home this point, this occurred relatively recently for the University of Texas, where an employee left a thumb drive on a shuttle bus, compromising 2,300 patients. Because these files were stored on a thumb drive, not in the cloud, the university had no way to recover those files after the loss, and as a result, suffered a data breach. In contrast, Google Docs is a cloud-centric solution. All your information is stored in the cloud, and so therefore you'll have a centralized location to set and manage data permissions. Google Docs offers a granular set of permissioning system. So you can set a particular document or a particular editor to be a viewer, read-only. It can be an editor, the ability to read or write, or you can give them suggesting permissions. And in that case, while the collaborator can't make direct changes to the document, they can add suggestions and they can add comments, something that is only possible when your document is stored in the cloud. Now, one of the important things about having this ability to have your data in the cloud, this permissioning for this data stored in the cloud, is that you can make adjustments as needed. In 2015, a teaching hospital in Massachusetts was forced to pay an almost $1 million settlement due to a data breach involving a laptop that was stolen more than 4 years earlier. Because this information was stored in files, the teaching hospital wasn't able to reclaim the information, and even when they realized the device was stolen, wasn't able to act on it. To assist with this, Google Docs offers expirations. The ability to say that when you share a document with another user, you can say that I want this access to expire on this date or after this period of time. And this would have been a great feature for Chuck and Dana. Chuck and Dana may have wanted to share a document with their larger team in the short term, but they might have said that after a month, we want to lock down this file. We want to make sure that no further changes are made. Expirations are a great way to do this. So we've talked a lot about how when your file is in the cloud, it's more secure. A natural question would be, well, what happens if a user downloads it? And this happened in 2011 when a hospital contractor downloaded 34,000 patient records to their personal device, violating company policy, and then lost their laptop. So how can we prevent that from happening? Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides support this with download restrictions. As an owner of a document, you can say that this is a particularly sensitive piece of information. I want to make sure that this document can't be downloaded, copied, or printed, making sure that your data stays private and stays in the cloud. One challenge with this sharing model and this security model is that in many cases, it's very easy to share data internally. External sharing is much more difficult. So if you're sharing with someone outside your organization, they may not have, they're external, and they may not even have a Google account. So the way that we're addressing this is with functionality to be able to securely share with external collaborators. And what this will use is two-factor authentication to share with anyone with an email address. So you can invite a user to collaborate on or an external user to collaborate on your document. You can use two-factor authentication to verify their identity. And from that point, you can use all of the granular permissioning and restrictions we talked about, making sure that you can share files with anyone that you work with. Now, it's not all about permissioning. Sometimes users make mistakes. In 2015, a Massachusetts General Hospital employee sent an email with Social Security's numbers of 648 patients to the wrong email address. Google Docs, because your information is stored in the cloud, is able to offer data loss prevention, or DLP. DLP can be set up to automatically scan your Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides files, identify sensitive information such as Social Security numbers, and restrict or warn users when they try to share this data or distribute it externally, helping you prevent these type of mistakes. In addition to auditing files, we allow you the ability to audit viewers. Using Activity Dashboard, you can, for each document, you can see which of your collaborators viewed a document, when they last viewed it, to help get a sense of is there inappropriate use of this document, and help to make the correct adjustments if necessary. Across all these examples, there is one theme in common. When you are sharing files, sending files to individual users, you're putting your company at risk. Google Docs, being cloud native, is able to consolidate all your information into the cloud, where it's much easier to apply the correct permissions and to help you make your organization more secure. So we've talked a little bit about collaboration. We've talked a little bit about security. But let's take a step back and talk about productivity. How can Google Docs help your organization save time? And there are two ways that we think about this. One is the collaboration, which we just discussed. The other is through machine learning. How can we leverage machine learning to make you and your organization more efficient and eliminate a lot of the overhead and wasted time? And there's a lot of potential here. McKinsey found that social collaboration has the potential to raise the productivity of workers by 20 to 25%. That's a huge increase. However, most organizations aren't taking advantage. According to the Harvard Business Review, knowledge workers spend 41% of their time on activities that could be handled by others, other coworkers, or by an artificial intelligence. At Google, this was surprising. So one of the things we did was to try to see how could we quantify this? How are knowledge workers spending their time? So we conducted a survey and found this is the breakdown of the average knowledge worker within a standard week. You see some of the usual suspects. There's integrating feedback from others, tracking tasks, research and analysis, and formatting and layout. But one number stood out, and that's 5%. Only 5% of a knowledge worker's time is actually spent on ideation. Only 3 minutes in every hour is spent doing the things that'll help actually move your business forward. The other 95% of time is spent on support for that ideation. And that is where Google Docs can help by assisting with these other 95% of activities to help your employees focus on what matters. So let's take a closer look at each of these categories. The first and largest is integrating feedback from others at 40% of a user's total time. And this was the main time suck we saw with Chuck and Dana. Each spent a huge amount of time consolidating copies, merging them together, and understanding when a document forked, how to bring it together again. And as we discussed, the way that Google Docs helps solve for this is through real-time collaboration. One source of truth stored in the cloud, allowing each individual user to both collaborate in real time, as well as being able to ensure that each user always sees the latest version of a document. The second advantage of this real-time collaboration is that it reduces the need for task switching. Task switching wastes an hour of 23 minutes every time a user is interrupted. It takes 23 minutes to get back to your task at hand. So that's why within Google Docs, we're so focused on making sure you have all the information you need right in front of you. We talked a little bit about this with our commenting infrastructure. This is why we've incorporated chat directly into the editors. And soon, we'll be introducing the G Suite side panel. Currently in Gmail, the G Suite side panel will allow you to pull in calendar information, Google Keep Notes, and tasks directly into your document without having to leave the app, without having to change your focus from what has to be done. The second largest segment of user time was 20% of knowledge, or 20% of time dedicated to tracking tasks. We talked a little bit how comments and action items, @mentions, help with this. We've taken it a step farther with suggested action items. Suggested action items leverage natural language processing to look at your doc, understand when a task should be assigned, who the assignee should be, and suggest the creation of that action item. This lets the document creator spend their mental energy on the thing that's important, creating the document, and let suggested action items take care of assigning out individual subtasks. The third item is research and analysis. 20% of users' time is spent on research and analysis. And this equates to nearly 2 hours per day of each user searching for and gathering information. Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides makes this easy using Docs Explorer. Docs Explorer leverages machine learning and natural language processing to understand the content of your document. And by understanding the content of your document, it's able to surface relevant information and relevant data directly within the Explorer side panel. So you can imagine if you were Chuck, creating your Q4 quarterly projections. In the side panel, Explorer might suggest you taking a look at your third quarter quarterly projections or other projections that your data science team had constructed, making sure that you always have the appropriate data at your fingertips. This is possible even outside of Docs. Drive Quick Access allows you to, it'll surface the correct Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides to you when you need them. We've all had that situation where we're rushing to a meeting and we're trying to find the correct document. Drive Quick Access understands that. It looks at your usage patterns and helps surface the content and the documents that are most relevant to you. So we've talked a lot about research. What about the analysis part? Who here uses spreadsheets in your day-to-day? That's almost everybody. And so we've definitely seen that spreadsheets are the bedrock for most enterprise data analysis. However, when we talk to users, less than 30% feel comfortable manipulating formulas within spreadsheets. They depend on them, but they don't feel comfortable with them. This is why we have Sheets Explore. Sheets Explore intelligently recognizes the content of your spreadsheet and is able to surface insights immediately. They could be visualizations, they could be statistical summaries, but what's important is that it takes your data, it recognizes it, and it chooses the best insight for you. However, most of the time when we're looking at a spreadsheet, it's not to get general insights, it's to ask a specific question. And that's why we have Sheets Explore Answers. Explore Answers allows you to type in natural language questions into Sheets. So for Dana, it may have been, what was our projections? What was our best-selling item last Mother's Day? Sheets Explore is able to understand the concept of best-selling item, understand the concept of Mother's Day, and instantly return that result. This is in contrast to the traditional way of working, in which you may need to have emailed a data analyst, had a back and forth about exactly what type of information you're looking for. And while you would finally get the result, it would take a lot of time. Sheets Explore allows you to ask these questions and get results in real time from any device. The final area of focus, 20% of total time, is formatting and layout. Think about the last time you constructed a presentation. It probably took a while. And a lot of the time, it's not the content, it's not the idea that takes so long. It's the constructing or formatting the actual deck. We're not all designers. So when we're spending time applying themes, choosing images, it may not be the best use of our time. That's where Slides Explorer comes in. Slides Explorer is your designer on demand. Open up a new slides deck, enter your content, and then Slides Explorer will suggest stock imagery. It would suggest slide layout. It'll suggest themes, allowing you to quickly and easily produce professional-looking decks. Let's quickly review. So 40% of users' time was integrating feedback from others. With real-time collaboration and the G Suite side panel, we make this easy, dramatically reducing this required time investment. 20% of users' time was spent tracking tasks, action items, and suggested action items. We make this quick and reduce the amount of time required to complete. Similarly, for research and assistance or research and analysis, Docs Explore, Quick Access, and Sheets Explore make this easy. And finally, for formatting and layout, Slides Explorer leverages machine learning technology to help to create professional-looking decks and professional-looking content in less time. This allows you to focus on what's important, that 5%. Let Google Docs take care of the rest, and you and your employees can focus on what's important. Now, we've talked a lot about how being cloud native, Google Docs creates a better collaboration platform, it improves security, and it helps make your workforce more productive. A natural question would be, will it fit into my work environment? Is it flexible enough to support my custom use cases? And in most cases, the answer is yes. We understand that migrating from a file-based collaboration system to a cloud-based collaboration system is a huge change. And we've invested a lot of time and effort to make this transition as easy and as seamless as possible. A couple features that to call out that help make this easy and help make this fast. First, while docs, sheets, and slides are cloud native, you aren't required to be online to use them. Each of the editors offers an offline mode. And what we do is we use machine learning to identify the documents that are most important to you. We then cache them and sync them to your device. So when you need to go offline, whether being on a plane, maybe working from home, you're able to access all the documents you need. And when you go back online, we can reconsolidate, we can merge them back into the cloud. We've talked a lot about how link sharing and working within the cloud is better than files. But we understand that in many cases, your organization depends on files. For that reason, docs, sheets, and slides are compatible with the most common file formats and allow you to import, edit, and export to these files as needed. In addition to file formats, we're also allowing you to choose the storage that fits best with your organization. So while by default, Docs works with Drive, we're also working with Box, Dropbox, and Ignite. If your organization wants to use a different storage provider, you can still use Docs as your editing platform and have your cloud stored with one of these providers. Data. A program like Google Sheets is only as good as the data it can reference. That's why we're building out a data connectors platform, allowing us to pull data from both Google platforms, such as Google BigQuery, as well as third-party platforms like Salesforce and SAP. And finally, we're working to be able to build into your workflow. The example that you see here is an integration that we're looking to launch with Salesforce. And what this does is it allows you to, from directly within Salesforce, to view any list, Salesforce list, natively within the Sheets UI. So you can do your analysis. You can leverage machine learning without ever using Salesforce. Together, we make it easy to adopt Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides by supporting online, offline, different file types, different storage providers, different data sets, and different workflows. Of course, to be realistic, we can't support every single custom requirement. That's why we make Docs, Sheets, and Slides customizable. We offer a robust set of APIs. We offer support for AppScript. And we offer the ecosystem of add-ons. So if there's ever a situation where your workflow isn't supported out of the box, using these, you can make sure that Docs, Sheets, and Slides fits into your organization as needed. If there's one thing that I want you to take away from this talk, it's that Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides were born in the cloud. They don't use, instead of using a traditional file structure, they use links to data stored in the cloud. And this makes it easier to collaborate, to manage security, to be productive, and to provide the flexibility to adopt into your existing workflows. But you don't have to take my word for it. we spoke to almost 400 domains that have adopted and use Google Docs and asked them what was the impact on their team, on their productivity, and on how they produced work. Across these domains, 81% reported that switching to Google Docs had a notable improvement in work quality. And 98% found that Google Docs improved their team collaboration. As a net result, across these domains, we found that switching to Google Docs saved 144 minutes per user per week for the average team member. This is time that's not spent on overhead and can be reallocated towards more productive means. So don't be like Chuck and Dana. Don't spend your time remerging files. Don't have the security risk of your file being shared outside the organization. By using Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides, you can take advantage of being cloud native and all of the advantages that come along with this. We've covered a lot of information here. And while we had a lot of breadth, if you're interested in a bit more depth and want to learn a bit more, we have 6 additional sessions talking to Google Docs, and for each of the items, looking at it in a bit more detail. Specifically, I want to call out the panel of CIOs that we will have speaking in about half an hour. These are organizations that have adopted Google Docs, and these leaders will say what has been the impact on their organization, how it has made their workers more productive, and what they see for the future. So I highly recommend it.